Facile formulas, catchy slogans, 10-step programs, and quick fixes often dominate today's management training programs. But in organizations, as in all of life, human behavior is seldom predictable, and business dilemmas do not easily lend themselves to gimmicks or simplistic answers. In Management of the Absurd, psychologist, educator, and former CEO Richard Farson presents a series of management paradoxes designed to challenge conventional wisdom and encourage managers to re-examine their assumptions about effective leadership. Good morning, this is Ron. Welcome to Storytime. And it is Thursday, October 19th, and this morning I'm going to be reading Chapter 20, Big Changes Are Easier to Make Than Small Ones. If ever there were a godfather to the idea of management of the absurd, it would surely be C. Northcote Parkinson, author of the famed Parkinson's Law, Work Expands to Fill the Time Available. He was also responsible for many other similarly witty but powerful insights into the absurdities of human organizations. It was Parkinson who formulated the observation that the time a committee takes to discuss an item on the agenda is inversely proportional to the amount of money involved. All who've sat through budget meetings will recognize that phenomenon. It may take hours to discuss $100 items while multi-million-dollar items fly by. Almost everybody knows something sensible to say about a small item on the budget, but few can offer wise comments about a $1 million item. The CEO of a medium-sized electronics company once told me that in one day he was able to completely change the shape of his organization, flatten the organization chart, and eliminate several layers of management. But it took days to persuade one person to move his desk 10 feet. We are all painfully aware of the excessive time taken up in minor issues. Henry Kissinger is credited with the remark that the reason university faculty discussions and disputes are so time-consuming and acrimonious is that the stakes are so low. The case against gradualism. In most of our efforts to bring about change, we are counseled to take a gradual approach. The metaphor usually applied in these cases, that we must crawl before we can walk and walk before we can run, seems to make good common sense. But it may be that, in the area of human affairs, that is not always the best counsel. Physician Dean Ornish, in arguing for a strict diet regimen, says that it is easier to make big changes rather than small ones because the benefits are so much more dramatic and they occur so much more quickly. Certainly, as we look at the pursuit of civil rights in America, it is not at all clear that gradualism has worked that well. The pace of change has certainly been gradual, but whether gradualism as a strategy has been effective is debatable. Martin Luther King called it the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. The bold act that most dramatically and quickly brought about racial integration in a major institution of our society was President Harry Truman's elimination of Jim Crow laws in the armed services, which he accomplished by executive order. Segregation in the military yielded not by gradualism, but by massive immediate change, albeit resented and resisted. Conversely, the gradual approach to integration has encountered resentment and resistance while failing to bring about necessary change. While it is clear that African Americans have made significant gains since slavery, it is also true that, except in special cases, the differences between them and whites on economic and social basis have not diminished for decades. The disparity between incomes is still substantial, our communities by and large are not integrated, and racism remains a strong force. I remember being told at the beginning of the modern civil rights movement that it might take an entire generation before the movement's overall objectives could be achieved. That was 2 entire generations ago, and still we see little change in the way in which African Americans and whites live together. The big change made by Truman held, the little ones have been much easier to resist. Bold moves. General Motors stunned the business world in 1991 when the automaker announced that it would close 21 factories and lay off 74,000 employees. Painful as it was, the action perfectly illustrated the case to be made for big changes. The company's managers were convinced that downsizing had to be accomplished. They could do it one factory at a time, reaping adverse publicity and hostile employee reaction every tortuous step of the way, or they could put it behind them as quickly as possible and move on with the business of recovery. Their success at instant downsizing did not go unnoticed at other major corporations which soon were doing the same. Chiat/Day Advertising and the Oticon Corporation of Stockholm are among the companies that have made radical changes in the design of their operations. Both used advanced communication technologies to switch to paperless systems, restructure their management, do away with private offices, and become virtual companies. Such radical change would be impressive even if it accomplished over a fairly long period of time. But in fact, both companies accomplished the changes all at once. If big changes are easier to make than small ones, that does not, of course, mean that making such changes is appropriate as a general strategy. Usually not enough patient, careful analysis goes into management decisions, large or small. But the fact remains that people respect bold moves and are more likely to buy into a change if it is big enough to withstand any attempt at countering it. And that's the end of Chapter 20. And coming up on the 21st of October, Saturday, I'll be reading Chapter 21. We learn not from our failures, but from our successes and the failures of others. And I will be making critiques of these chapters on my blog at www.ronaldhardgrove.blogspot.com. So until Saturday, thank you very much for joining me. Have a great day.